Hey there, ever feel like those leadership books with their lists of essential traits are missing something? Like maybe there's more to it than just checking boxes. You are absolutely right. Today we're diving into a fascinating take on leadership, one that moves beyond the hero leader myth and gets into the nitty-gritty of how leadership actually works in the real world.
And we're going to do that by looking at leadership as a practice, drawing on insights from the Sage Handbook of Leadership and a study called Leadership as Practice, challenging the competency paradigm.
Okay, so right off the bat, challenging the competency paradigm sounds intriguing. It's like they're about to turn our whole idea of leadership upside down.
It's a good thing we like a good mental shakeup. So
Mhm.
you know how we often talk about leadership in terms of competencies, like a good leader needs to be charismatic, a good communicator, strategic thinker, and so on.
Right, like it's a recipe. Get your charisma here, add a dash of delegation, and boom, instant leader.
Exactly. That's the competency model in a nutshell. It seems appealing because it tries to break down this complex thing, leadership, into a set of definable, achievable skills. But one of our sources today, the Carroll article, points out that this approach, while tempting, has some fundamental flaws.
Okay, I'm all ears. Spill the tea on why this competency model isn't all it's cracked up to be.
Well, for starters, it assumes one size fits all. It's like saying you could use the same map to navigate a bustling city in a remote island. The context matters. And leadership, just like navigating different terrains, requires flexibility and adaptation.
So knowing how to delegate tasks effectively might make you a rock star project manager,
Hmm.
but that doesn't automatically make you the best person to lead a brainstorming session or navigate a company crisis.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Carroll points out that the very definition of competency, as it's often used, is inherently individualistic. It focuses on the leader as a lone wolf, separate from the pack. But leadership doesn't happen in a vacuum, does it?
Absolutely not. It's all about how people interact, how they influence each other, how they work together or don't towards a common goal.
Right. And the competency model, with its emphasis on individual traits, often misses this crucial aspect of collective dynamics. It's like trying to understand a symphony by only analyzing the individual notes played by each musician. You'll miss the harmony, the rhythm, the overall impact of the music.
Okay, so if the competency model is like trying to understand a symphony by just listening to individual notes, how does this whole leadership as practice idea help us hear the whole orchestra, so to speak?
That's a great analogy. And to answer your question, these sources encourage us to shift our focus from the individual leader to the collective, to the interactions, and to those often unspoken ways things get done. Instead of analyzing leaders like specimens under a microscope, we need to zoom out and look at the entire ecosystem in which leadership emerges.
So less about hero leaders and more about understanding how direction and influence actually play out in the real world.
Exactly. One of our articles, the Cravani and Lamy study, calls this the logic of practice. They argue that instead of seeing leadership as something a leader does to followers, we need to look at how direction emerges from the collective.
I'm really curious about this idea of logic of practice. It sounds like it goes beyond just the interactions between people.
You're right, it does. Cravani and Lamy highlight something they call the materiality of leadership, which might sound a bit academic at first, but it's actually quite fascinating. They're basically saying that we need to pay attention to the physical space, the objects, the technology, all the stuff that surrounds us, because it all influences how we lead and how we follow.
Okay, now that you mention it, I've definitely been in those stuffy boardrooms where the seating arrangement practically screams hierarchy.
Mhm.
It's like the furniture itself is trying to tell you who's in charge.
Precisely. The physical environment can either reinforce old patterns or open up new possibilities for how we interact and lead. And it's not just about boardrooms. Think about how open-plan offices, for example, can either foster collaboration or lead to constant distractions. The design of the space matters.
That's such a good point. It makes you wonder how much we try to change leadership behaviors without considering the environment in which those behaviors take place.
Absolutely. And here's another example from Cravani and Lamy that really brings this to life. You talk about how we often equate a CEO giving a speech with leadership in action. But they challenge us to ask, what if we shifted our attention from the CEO's words to what happens in the room afterward? How do people react? What actions do they take or not take based on what they heard?
So it's not about the leader's intention, but the collective response.
Exactly. Cravani and Lamy are saying that to truly understand leadership as practice, we need to look at those everyday interactions, those subtle cues, those often invisible forces that shape how people behave and how influence unfolds in any given situation. And this leads us to some really compelling insights from Carroll's research on leadership development.
Okay, I'm ready for those aha moments. What did they find out?
Well, Carol's team interviewed people who had gone through leadership development programs. And what's fascinating is that when asked to reflect on what they learned, these individuals didn't talk about mastering specific leadership skills.
They didn't. So what did they say?
They talked about profound shifts in their habits and their awareness of themselves and others, and how they fundamentally viewed leadership. It was less about adding new tools to their toolbox and more about a deep personal transformation in how they showed up as leaders. And one of the most striking themes that emerged was this idea of undoing oneself.
Undoing oneself. That's a powerful image. What does that look like in practice?
Well, Carol includes a bunch of quotes from the participants in their study, and one that really stuck with me was someone saying, "It's the extent to which I undo myself."
Wow, so it's not just about adding on new skills, it's about letting go of old habits, old assumptions, maybe even old versions of yourself that no longer serve you as a leader.
Exactly. It's like hitting the reset button on how you view leadership and your role within it.
Undoing yourself to become a better leader. That's such a thought-provoking concept. It's like you're saying leadership development isn't about building yourself up into some kind of perfect leader, but rather about breaking down those ingrained habits and assumptions that might actually be holding you back.
That's exactly it. And this idea of undoing ties into a concept that both of our sources today emphasize, which is the importance of tacit knowledge in leadership.
Tacit knowledge. I have to admit that one sounds a bit intimidating. Can you break it down for me?
Of course. Tacit knowledge is basically all that wisdom, experience, and intuition that we gain through years of navigating the world and interacting with others. It's the stuff we often can't quite put into words, but it informs how we make decisions, how we read a room, how we respond to challenges.
So it's like that feeling you get when you meet someone and just instinctively know whether you can trust them or not. You can't explain why you feel that way, but something in your gut tells you it's true.
Precisely. And in the context of leadership, tacit knowledge is what allows us to make those split-second decisions, to read between the lines, to understand the unspoken dynamics at play. It's that deep well of experience that often separates truly effective leaders from those who are just going through the motions.
That makes a lot of sense. So how does this idea of undoing ourselves and tapping into our tacit knowledge actually play out in those leadership development programs that Carol studied?
Well, one of the key findings was that participants started to pay much closer attention to their own behaviors and the impact they had on others. They became more self-aware, more mindful of their actions, and more intentional in how they showed up as leaders.
So instead of just reacting on autopilot, they started to create space for reflection and conscious choice in their leadership. Did they give any examples of what this looked like in practice?
Absolutely. One participant described it this way, and I'm quoting directly from Carol's article here. "I look at things more carefully and think about it more. And in an everyday sense, if there's something cropping up, I think, how am I going to go about this?
Yeah.
Instead of just going out and doing it."
That's such a powerful shift. It reminds me of that old saying, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. It sounds like that's exactly what these leadership development programs were helping people to do, to create that space for thoughtful response.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it highlights how this approach to leadership development differs from simply teaching a set of skills. It's about facilitating a deeper understanding of oneself and how one's actions ripple out and affect the entire system.
So if we're moving away from this competency-based model of leadership development, what does a more practice-oriented approach actually look like?
Well, Carroll suggests that instead of focusing on abstract traits, leadership development should create immersive experiences that allow individuals to experiment with different leadership styles, to make mistakes, and to learn from those experiences in a safe and supportive environment.
So it's less about classroom lectures and more about hands-on learning, mentorship, and getting comfortable with the messy reality of leadership.
Exactly. And this is where Cravani and Lammy's concept of materiality comes back into play. They would argue that we need to pay just as much attention to the design of those immersive experiences as we do to the content itself. The physical space, the technology we use, even the objects we surround ourselves with, can either support or hinder our efforts to develop more effective leadership practices.
So if you're trying to create a leadership development program that encourages collaboration, for example, you wouldn't want to stick everyone in a traditional classroom setup with rows of desks facing a whiteboard. You'd want to create a more flexible, open, and inviting space that encourages interaction and discussion.
Exactly. The environment itself needs to embody the principles of the leadership practices you're trying to cultivate.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. We often think of leadership as something that resides solely within individuals, a set of traits or skills that some people have and others don't. But what I'm hearing from you today is that leadership is so much more nuanced and dynamic than that. It's about the interactions between people, the environment in which those interactions take place, and the often invisible forces that shape how we behave and influence each other.
That's a fantastic summary. And it leads us to a final and, I think, quite empowering thought. What if, instead of striving to be a leader, with all the pressure and expectations that come with that label, we focused on cultivating the practices that allow leadership to emerge organically in all aspects of our lives?
So instead of asking ourselves, am I a leader? We start asking, how am I showing up in this moment? Am I creating space for others to contribute? Am I listening deeply? Am I open to different perspectives?
Exactly. Those practices, they're available to all of us, regardless of our job title or position.
I love that. This deep dive has given us a lot to reflect on. So, as you go about your day, pay attention to those everyday moments where leadership is emerging both in yourself and in those around you. And ask yourself, how can I cultivate those practices in my own life? How can I create the conditions for leadership to flourish in my team, my organization, and my community? That's it for today's deep dive. We'll be back next time with another thought provoking topic. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.